Slava Isusu Christu. We are continuing our series on a modern-day martyr, episodes from the life of Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky. Today I'd like to share a rather complicated story of our monastery in Ivano-Frankivsk. Today it's called Ivano-Frankivsk. It was the city of Stanislavl prior to the Second World War. And Father Vasyl Velychkovsky became the ichum, the superior of that monastery in 1935 after his mission in Volyn. And while he was in the monastery, the monastery chapel was the place of gathering for the faithful who came to the monastery for liturgies and for prayers, for molabins, akaphasis. Blessed Vasyl was planning to build a church on that property that we had in almost the center part of the city. He gathered the material, bought the material, was already stacked up on the property, but he needed permission from the Polish government, that was the government of the day, and they refused to give a permit. And he was back and forth with the government, and in the end, 1939, the Second World War broke out. The Soviets walked in. He was still in the monastery for another year until 1941, but it was impossible to do any building at that time. 1940 rather, he was had a huge rally, a procession in honor of the Mother Perpetual Help in the city of Stanislavl. That's another story. And he was arrested after that, and fearing the people, they released him. The Nazis came through Ukraine in the summer of 1941, pushing back the Soviets. He was transferred back to Lviv and then to Ternopil. For a while he was in Communist Podilsk. After the war in the late 1940s, the Soviets had taken over the whole territory, expelling our redemptorists from the monastery. And a few years later, in the early 50s, they destroyed the monastery. When the monastery, before it was destroyed, the people of the city, of the parishioners, went into the monastery and took a number of articles from the monastery and hid them. Kneelers, crosses, processional crosses, icons. They took them into their homes and hid them in the attics. And the monastery was destroyed. And it was a vacant lot. Next to the monastery was built a huge hospital, a maternity hospital, encroaching on our property. In 1988, they had plans to expand the hospital even more onto our property. But as we know, the Berlin Wall came down and freedom came to Ukraine in 1991. And I was taken there in that year. I was taken with Father Pelech, drove us down to Ivano-Frankivsk to show us the former property of the redemptorists. They were not planning to take it over because of the hospital was on their property, and it was kind of difficult to imagine a monastery with a 7-story building next to them. So it remained vacant, but he told me the story of the property, the desire to build a church and all that. I had come back several times to there, and in the late 1990s, we had already received some property on the north side of the city in lieu of this property. But this property was vacant. I heard that it would cost about $7,000 to buy that property, and I was kind of willing that we should buy it. But then from Canada, buying property in Ukraine wasn't the easiest, and our redemptorists weren't that eager to take it. I heard a year later that Bishop Sophrony Mudry bought that property, or rather claimed that property for the church. And very soon after put what they call a wagon. It's like a trailer about the size of this room on that property where they would have the divine liturgy. So they called the parish the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And they began, they had a little cross there, and I was there where they would have the liturgy in front of this on a little platform. I reminded people that Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky was on this property. And as the years went, we saw it moving from a chapel. They gained some property just north of that, right adjacent to this property, where they made that the chapel in the 2000s already. Went around 2008 or so. This little wagon was made into a museum in honor of Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky. We kept insisting upon this, that there should be some objects. And into this museum, they brought the stuff that they had hidden in their attics. They brought it to the chapel that they had, and now into this museum. Crosses, some icons. We brought books from Canada, brochures, and it was this property was in the middle of the city, and so the mafia was very much interested in this property. And the priest who was serving there knew that. And one evening, they had come with their moving machines to advance upon their property and to claim it for the mafia. The priest heard of that, and that very evening he set up a huge cross just where they would be entering. And so they did not enter. And he prayed and they stopped from entering. But as a result, a few weeks later, the mafia burnt the museum down. So it became shambles. When the museum was burnt, all the objects of the museum burnt except for some kneelers made of wood, except for a processional cross, and except for this hand cross. We see it's charcoal, and the people right away took it that these objects were used by Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky. He knelt on those kneelers. The processional cross was used in those processions in honor of Mary and other processions. And that he would use this hand cross in blessing the people. This side, as you see, is charred. The other side is old, but it's not even burnt. They claim that they were saved from this fire through the intercession of Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky. On that property now exists a beautiful church. It was built in the mid-2000s, around 2010, 11, 12. We were there for the blessing of the church, and they have, sub-named the church is still called the Nativity of Blessed Virgin Mary, but also in honor of Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky. They have the first-class relics on the tetrapod of the church, and in the basement of the church they have a whole room dedicated to the underground church, especially Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky. His icon there, the procession crosses there, the kneelers are there, and so we have this place in Ivano-Frankivsk, has been restored where the monastery used to be, where the monastery is now as a garden, but we still found a few stepping stones in the monastery chapel floor that were saved. So we have mementos of that, and just to knowledge that Blessed Vasyl was there and the church acknowledges his presence, that he was a former pastor of that place. And so we're very pleased to have this church on a very important street, Charnovola, near the downtown, which is near the university, where the university students come often to pray in this church. And the Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky served from 1935 until 1941. Slava Isusu Christu.